Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight on this Thursday, July 25th.
I ran and won on a platform for change, and that is what we are delivering to the residents of the city of Chicago.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot sits down for an extended conversation about her first 2 months in office. After a budget impasse had many college students fleeing Illinois, will a boost in funding help persuade the next wave to study in-state?
Safety was just utterly disregarded.
A new documentary explores the deadliest day in Chicago history.
People don't remember necessarily what you did, but they remember how you made them feel.
Getting a feel for an unusual entertainment show in town. Meet the stars of Teatro ZinZanni.
This is like what grilled cheese smells like in heaven.
I assume that in heaven everything is deep fried.
Yes, but is it on fire? Our next installment of Deep Fridays takes on flaming Saganaki. Opa. All that and more next on Chicago Tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Paris Schutz. Local Puerto Ricans' demonstrations have turned into celebrations. Amanda Vinicky has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Amanda.
Paris, some Puerto Ricans here are jubilant that the American territory's governor, Ricardo Rosselló, is resigning following leaked private chats and a corruption scandal. Crowds swelled the streets in Puerto Rico. Many members of Chicago's sizable Puerto Rican community are rejoicing too, but leaders of the group Puerto Rican Agenda of Chicago say there are deeper problems that still need to be addressed. They say the island's crushing debt and resulting austerity measures have hamstrung residents. They're calling for a congressional audit of Puerto Rico's finances and an overhaul of Puerto Rico's powerful fiscal oversight board. Chicago is already a so-called welcoming city that generally keeps the police force from cooperating with federal immigration and customs enforcement. But there are a few exceptions that some immigrant rights groups are trying to rid of.
We want to be able to tell the immigrant community, we want to be able to tell our families that they should not fear calling 911, no matter what their situation may be. And as long as our ordinance, as long as city code leaves the door open for CPD to collaborate with ICE, we cannot tell our community, do not be afraid to call 911.
As it stands now, Chicago police can help ICE if an undocumented resident has an outstanding criminal warrant, a prior felony, or a pending felony charge. 32 of the city's 50 aldermen have signed on to a measure removing those exemptions. They want it passed in September. The Chicago-based MacArthur Foundation is the new co-owner of the Johnson Publishing Company's archives. The archives include 4 million prints and negatives of the Black diaspora, from photo shoots of African-American celebrities to historic images of Emmett Till in his coffin. 5 foundations will collectively pay $30 million to acquire the Ebony and Jet magazine archives. A judge gave initial approval in a Chicago bankruptcy court today. The consortium plans to transfer the archives to a variety of cultural institutions, including the Smithsonian's African American History Museum, with the intent of broad access to the public. As for the weather, mostly clear tonight with a low around 65. Tomorrow, sunny again, yay, with a high near 87. Now, Paris, back to you.
Thank you, Amanda. It's been a busy first 2 months for Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Yesterday, she scored a pair of legislative victories on some of her campaign promises, namely boosting workplace protections for Chicago employees and beefing up city council ethics rules. But the stubborn problems of crime and fiscal uncertainty remain front and center. Joining us now to talk about the highs and lows of her first 65 days is Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Mayor Lightfoot, great to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
On the ethics bill that passed yesterday, no more conflict of interest jobs for aldermen, meaning Ed Burke has to choose between being a property tax appeal lawyer or having a stake in that company or being an alderman. Do you anticipate he'll comply with these new rules?
Well, I have no idea whether he'll comply or not willingly, but the rules are very clear, and we expect to enforce them aggressively. We can't continue to have a system where individuals who are elected officials or appointed officials put their own monetary interest ahead of the public's. And that's what that particular part of the ethics reforms is intended to get at.
Does this mean he'll have to divest from any economic relationship with that law firm if he wants to stay an alderman?
Certainly, in the first instance, he can't himself represent any interests who are contrary. And we'll work with the ethics board to figure out the specific mechanics, but it is designed to go after people like Ed Burke and others who decide that they are going to put their own pecuniary interest ahead of the interests of the taxpayers. That's got to end.
On the ethics front, is it ethical that one of your advisors, a volunteer advisor, has skirted city residency rules and she lives in Wilmette?
She has not skirted city residency rules, so I want to make that very clear. She's hired by an entity that doesn't have the same residency rules, and she's providing advice and leadership to us. She's a person that I've known for a very long time, incredibly competent, helped on the Police Accountability Task Force, was very instrumental in our transition efforts, and is doing a lot to help us stand up this brand new administration.
This advisor name is Lisa Schneider-Fabes, and the entity you're talking about is World Business Chicago,
That's right.
which is this public-private agency. It's been free of any FOIA laws. The public can't FOIA this agency to find out what people make or what it really does. Do you want to change that?
Yeah, we're working on looking at that, looking at Navy Pier. When taxpayer dollars are at stake, there's got to be more transparency. So stand by, but we're looking at making sure that those entities are much more transparent than they have been.
So would you support them being accountable to FOIA laws, to public records laws?
As I said, we're looking at making sure that they are more transparent than they have been.
Okay, also yesterday, landslide victory in another legislative initiative of yours, the Fair Workweek Ordinance, where employers now have to give workers a 10-day notice of their schedule. How did you assuage the concerns of safety net hospitals who say we need to be able to call in people in an emergency, every hour?
Well, I think we did it in a couple of ways. Look, first of all, this is a landmark and historic piece of legislation. This has been worked on for 2.5 years by certain business interests, certain labor interests, but they got stuck. And it looked like it was not going to go move forward in April before I took office. So we rolled up our sleeves. We knew that this was something important. And this piece of legislation covers two big industries that no place else in the country does, which is hospitals and manufacturing. But it was a lot of work, and making sure that we gave voices that hadn't been part of the back and forth an opportunity to have a seat at the table. My hat's off to our friends in organized labor, but also the business community, and particularly I want to say Chairman Sue Garza did a yeoman's job in really navigating a lot of different and competing interests. The safety net hospitals, we talked a lot with them about their precarious economic status, and really what's at heart there is they have not had an increase in Medicaid reimbursement rates in 15 years. So I committed to work with them at the state level and the federal level to change that those economics around to make sure that they're actually getting funding that's important to them in a timely fashion so they can take care of those who are sick and infirm but are on the lower end of the economic scale.
And we should mention their concerns with this was that they'd have to pay penalties and fines as much as $30 million a year to call people in at the last minute. Will they still have to pay these fines out
they're
in
going to
the
be
revised ordinance?
They will be subject to the penalties, but obviously we're going to work with them. We've given them additional time to implement the necessary changes to build the infrastructure, and we recognize that hospitals are different, and so that's going to be part of the calculus. The one thing that's important is we built in a review period, so we're going to be looking at data and how this legislation is being implemented from both the worker perspective but also the employer perspective. And if we need to go back in and tweak it to be responsive to the real life market forces, we'll do that.
Speaking of both perspectives, the employer and the employee can sign a written statement foregoing these scheduling restrictions.
Right.
What's to stop a manager from pressuring an employee to sign that?
I feel very confident that we're not going to see any of that. We have ways that employees who feel like they're being unfairly pressured or just not being treated fairly can talk to us anonymously. Obviously, organized labor is very involved in this work. So I feel confident that we've got a good a set of protections, but also that's part of what the review period is going to be, to look at and make sure that there's no gaming of the system, so that employees are treated fairly and that we've got the right mechanism in place to continue the growth of our businesses.
I want to move on to another item in the news that you've let your feelings be known on. A Chicago Tribune investigation found that police for years had been creating dossiers on anyone who wants to go speak in the public comment portion of Chicago Police Board meetings. You just put a stop to that practice. Who ordered it in the first place?
As best we can tell, this started back in 2013, which would have been the time that Gary McCarthy was superintendent. There's not a lot of good record keeping that we can tell on how it started, why it started, but we know it started at least as early as 2013, and then mindlessly got carried forward in successive administrations. When I found out about it, I won't use the words that I used then, but suffice it to say, I was extremely unhappy. I thought it was foolish. I thought it was, would have, hopefully not, but I was worried about it having a chilling effect of people coming to the police board, and I immediately ordered the practice stop.
Who is this information for? Because you said when you were police board chair, you didn't know about this, you just found out about it. So who are they producing this stuff for?
Well, I mean, I think the sad reality is that it started in 2013, at least then, but nobody was actually consuming the information, meaning this was just collected as a matter of course every month, distributed to a wide group of people within CPD, and then obviously the police board, but nobody was actually using it. It was just this thing that was done once the list of speakers was known the day before or the day of a police board meeting.
On the issue of crime, you know, your campaign has been about structurally reforming the violent crime situation in this city. You proposed a bunch of things, but what are you proposing that other mayors before you have not proposed?
Well, I think a number of things. First of all, we are engaged in a much more coordinated approach to fighting crime. I've said this all along. This is not a problem that can be solved by law enforcement alone. So we've seen, I think, an unprecedented amount of coordination among city agencies.
And that wasn't happening in the previous administration?
That was not happening before. Number two is we're actually standing up a robust Mayor's Office of Public Safety. If you think about what the FTEs are, full-time employees in New York or LA, New York it's about 50, LA it's about 30. We've only had about 3 people who were responsible for the whole array of public safety.
In an executive branch public safety
Correct.
office, you're saying?
So we are standing up a brand new office with a lot more resources, focused not only on violence, but also on addressing our victims, addressing our returning citizens, and then also looking at not just police, but fire and homeland security. So we are looking and approaching the issue of public safety in a very different way.
You said recently you fear that the CPD is losing control of the streets, particularly on some of these violent summer weekends. Is your confidence in Superintendent Johnson waning a bit?
It's not waning, but I'm pushing him and I'm pushing the rest of them not to accept the status quo. We are doing better. If you look at year over year, you look at long-term trends, the trends are moving in a positive direction, meaning violence is going down, but we still have an inordinate amount of violence when we compare ourselves to our peer cities of New York and LA. So we're gaining ground, but we have a lot more ground to gain, and I keep pushing because this is important. This is literally life and death.
And this has been the case for many years with New York, LA, and Chicago. New York and LA combined typically have fewer murders than Chicago. Can you boil it down to any 1 or 2 reasons that that's happening?
Well, it's hard to make an apples-to-apples comparison because we're very different. We're very different to New York, and New York really is not a great comparator. We're probably closer to LA, but there again, there are differences. We have these small little cliques of gangs that aren't under the control of any particular leadership. So it's literally block by block. The other thing that's different is we have a longer, more entrenched history of racial segregation and lack of investment. That is a big difference maker between us and these other cities. So we have to make sure that as we are focusing on rebuilding the quality of life in a lot of these neighborhoods, particularly on the west side, in the 15th district and the 11th district, and then on the south side. We have not had the kind of strategic investment that we can point to that provides jobs, good schools, access to good quality health care. The things that we take for granted as indicators of good quality of life in neighborhoods, those are the things that are missing in a lot of these neighborhoods. And so we have young people who literally don't know people who go to work every single day in a legitimate job. We have commercial corridors that are vacant. So when we start making those investments, and we're working on a larger strategic plan around those kinds of investments, we're going to see, I hope, a significant drop in the violence because we're going to give people hope.
There's always sort of tension between the mayor's office and the Fraternal Order of Police. There's more tension now. Today, the national FOP head is calling on you to apologize for hot mic comments at yesterday's city council meeting where you called an FOP official, quote, that FOP clown. Are you sorry for using those words and calling him that?
I said yesterday that it was inappropriate for me to say those things out loud, yes.
Out loud, but are you sorry? Is that an apology for using those words at all?
Look, the FOP and I have a long history, and I've committed to President Graham that we're going to work cooperatively together. As I said yesterday, it was inappropriate for me to say that out loud.
Also yesterday, you yelled at a man during public commentary, telling him, quote, "Don't ever tell me what to do when I'm conducting the business of the people." Over the years, Mayor Emanuel was scrutinized for being perceived as a bully sometimes, for a certain demeanor. Is this kind of temperament helpful in getting your agenda passed?
No, so let's talk about the specific thing that happened there. The man was talking. I actually reached for my notepad to write down a note to myself based upon the thing that he was talking about. And this man, and I emphasize man, because I looked away to grab my notebook, said, "I need your full attention." I thought that was rude and frankly sexist. And I'm not going to let anybody talk to me like that. Women are denigrated all the time in a workplace. And I will tell you, I got a lot of favorable comments from women, even on my staff, who said, "You know what? You were right. We shouldn't let people talk to us that way."
So in the context, you felt it was important to stand up to that?
Absolutely. In the context, I thought he was really out of place. I'm sitting there. I didn't leave like has happened in the past. I sat there, as I do, and I will continue to do, through public comment, making eye contact with people, listening to what they say, taking notes, and I just so happened reached over to get my notes, and this guy thought I was being disrespectful, which he has a right to his opinion, but he doesn't have a right to tell me how I need to conduct myself.
Certainly, public comment can get heated. There's no ban on what the public can come up and say in front of elected officials in that moment. There's also been some heat between you and Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle. She wrote you a letter asking you to stop blaming the violent crime problem on bail reform, and she's citing statistics that show that less than 1% of felons released from jail custody went out and committed another violent crime. Do you believe those statistics?
I don't think and she's citing to a report that was put out by the Chief Judge. I think there's some fundamental problems with that report, particularly given the time period in which the data was measured. But fundamentally, it's this. What we know is weekend after weekend, our police department arrests some very dangerous folks who are using guns, who are possessing guns, who have long criminal histories. When I see reports, as I have weekend after weekend, where people who are charged with murder, people who are charged with aggravated battery, with a firearm, are getting out on bond, that doesn't make any sense to me. When you've got a long history of gun violence, and really wreaking havoc in communities, I think that should be taken into consideration as to whether or not you're a danger to the community.
And the Chief Judge says there's a new tool that judges use to determine who's a danger to the community. Is it not working?
The tool focusing on danger to the community and flight risk absolutely are the right two things to focus on. But the challenge with that tool is it's based upon aggregated data from across the country. So it measures from Anchorage to Alabama. We're not the same. We have a different set of criteria that should be part of the calculus that it goes into that tool. And the fact that a UUW, which is unlawful use of a weapon, which is a very standard charge for people who are possessing firearms, that isn't calculated as a crime of violence, it shows that there's a flaw in that tool. So what I'm saying, and I hope the president will actually take me up on it, instead of sending me these kinds of poison pen letters.
Was that all political?
Look, I can't sit there and say what her motivation is, but if she wants to build relationships with me and city government, when we had a meeting right before this. We sat down, talked about things that we could do to collaborate. This issue didn't come up, and then the next thing I know, out of nowhere, I get this letter. That's really not a way to actually build bridges and to work on things that we can collaborate on. So my offer from last week still stands. We'll put our data out. They should put their data out real time, and let's sit down and bring all the stakeholders
And the point you're making is
together.
her data is not including the charge of UUW, unlawful use of a weapon, so it's skewing it. I want to move on to what we heard in the top of the show. You've got aldermen saying that they want to close remaining loopholes in the sanctuary city ordinance. Do you support not allowing CPD to cooperate with immigration agents, even if it means it's dealing with an undocumented person with a criminal background?
Paris, I already took care of that. Right?
Well, they say there's still some loopholes.
Well, but we were very clear and intentional. I directed the superintendent. He followed it up with an order. There's been training on this. We took ICE out of any access to our databases. We specifically said we will never be engaged in facilitating any immigration-related activities. I think that's a pretty strong statement. And in fact, I had a number of mayors, I was at a conference recently, who were asking me, how'd you do it? What'd you do? We're leading the nation on this issue. Yes, there are exceptions to the Welcome in City ordinance. We've been very engaged and intentional with the activists. We will close off and eliminate those exceptions, but it's a question of sequencing because we have litigation at stake that is specifically cabining in the Trump administration's ability to act unilaterally and go around Congress. We want to make sure that we get that nailed down first, as we've said, and then we will take care of other parts of the Welcoming City ordinance.
I want to move on, Mayor, to the condition of the city's finances. The budget gap has been put at anywhere at or above $700 million. Do you, at this point, have a more accurate number as to what that gap is?
Well, we are working on that long and hard. I have meetings about it several times a week and looking at ways in which we can close the gap, build efficiencies, and that work is ongoing. When we have a better sense of what it will be based upon independent measures that we can take as a city administration, we will absolutely come forward, disclose it to the public, and provide specific solutions on how we can address it. I said during the campaign over and over again that the first step that we had to do is demonstrate to the public that we were going to be better fiscal stewards. We were taking some steps in that direction. One of the biggest, we have our first ever chief risk officers that's going to be starting soon. We've taken some measures to eliminate lines of credit that were costing us literally hundreds of millions of dollars every year.
And will the risk officers deal with police lawsuits too?
Absolutely. That'll be the first item on the agenda. So we are moving in the right direction. When we get a sense of what the size of the gap will be after we've taken these internal measures, then we'll come to the public and say, here's what it is.
Very clear that revenue is going to have to be on the table. Do you know at this point what buckets of revenue?
No, and only because a lot of it's going to depend on what the size of the gap is. There's a lot of things that we're looking at, some of which we can do independently, some of which we're going to need help from Springfield, and that'll be part of the solution process that we roll out.
On the issue of education, you've got the Chicago Teachers Union trying to get a contract with the city. They've been out there threatening to strike. Are you worried that a strike might happen?
No, I'm not, because first of all, they can't strike at this point. We have been at the table. We've had now upwards of 30 bargaining sessions. My team was back at the table with them today. I think we put out a very robust economic plan, which is $300 million, a 14% increase over 5 years. We will be announcing soon some specifics around other support personnel like nurses, librarians, counselors, and so forth. There should be no reason why CTUs will strike. I understand the rhetoric, I understand the motivation behind that, but we are at the table working hard. School should open on time, a deal should be done. If they are coming to us in good faith, there should be no reason for a strike.
You recently announced 5 potential sites for a Chicago casino to be studied, a feasibility study. Aldermen representing, I believe, 3 of those sites say, not in my ward. Will you respect their wishes if they don't want a casino in
Well,
their
the
ward?
one thing I want to clear up, which I think is a misnomer, the feasibility study is really intended to demonstrate whether or not, given the tax structure that the General Assembly put in place, a casino can be financed. And you can't make that evaluation in a vacuum. You have to actually look at particular sites. So we picked some sites that have been historically talked about. I understand that there's some concerns on the part of aldermen, but we are going to actually tomorrow roll out a survey to community members asking them their views on where a casino should be sited, other economic questions, quality of life issues. So this is going to be a robust survey that is really the first step in thinking about where a casino should be located in Chicago.
So there'll be a survey. We surveyed a few aldermen recently, and they say that the target market for this casino should be visitors and tourists. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that's part of what the feasibility study is going to look at, is where in the city is the best location is part of it, but really, can we finance a casino based upon this tax structure that the General Assembly has put in place so far? We're concerned about it. We think it takes too much money out of the pockets of a potential casino operator before the doors would even open. So that's what we're really focused on, is can we even finance this deal in the first instance?
And do you think a downtown location would be on the table?
No, I'm not going to speculate about where. The minute I do that, then there's going to be, it should be here, it should be there, there's going to be land speculation. We're going to look and see what the feasibilities tells us about the economics first, and then we'll get to the site selection later.
You recently stopped water meter
Yes.
replacements because of the spike in lead levels that occurs after some of these take place. Will all the city's lead pipes have to be replaced, do you think?
Well, look, that's an $8 billion proposition, which there's no funding for that right now. Ideally, yes, we'd love to do that, but we've got to be realistic about the economics of that. So we're looking at a lot of different models that we can partner with homeowners on, but in the short term, what I want to make sure that it's clear, city water's safe. Anybody who's got any questions or concerns about that, call 311. You can get your water tested, and you can get a free filter. I have a water meter installed in my house. We went through the process, got our water tested safe. But if anybody's got any concerns about it, please do call 311 and start the process of getting your water tested.
Mayor Lightfoot, in the minute or so we have left, you've been on the job a few months.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that's been the biggest surprise to you about this job?
Well, not really a surprise, but I'm really enjoying it. I mean, it's a tremendous, humbling honor to be the mayor of this great city. I see the challenges that we have, but I also see we have incredible talent, and there's a lot of opportunity for us to move forward. What I'm primarily focused on in everything that we're doing is driving towards transforming the city. I think a lot about young children that are growing up in neighborhoods where there's not nearly the kind of opportunities that I had as a kid. And we didn't have a lot of financial resources, but there were opportunities at our fingertips. So a lot of what we're focused on is providing those kinds of opportunities, so the life expectancies and really the life outcomes for kids are the same regardless of zip code.
This is a very difficult and demanding job. I'm curious, what do you do in your downtime? And you also have a family to take care of. So what are your downtime activities as mayor?
Well, we spend a lot of time together as a family, as much as we possibly can. I'm a sports nut, so we've been spending a lot of time
Training camp for the Bears just started.
I'm excited about that. I'm excited about our Bears. We've been going to baseball games, both the Cubs and the White Sox. And we also are big fans of the Chicago Sky. So we spend a lot of time as a family going to sporting events, but we're good. We're enjoying it.
Apparently you were at the Rolling Stones concert
Yes.
as well, as Mick Jagger called out. Mayor Lightfoot, thank you for being here. We hope it's the first of many discussions that we can have in this forum.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, and there is more Chicago Tonight just ahead, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Allstate. Allstate is investing in Chicago's youth. We believe good starts young. That's why we're helping our youth develop the skills they need to achieve success in life. Allstate is proud to empower the next generation of leaders.
Still to come on Chicago Tonight, a new documentary investigates a tragedy that left more than 800 people dead in downtown Chicago. A Chicago husband and wife team soars in a new theatrical spectacle in the Loop. And Greek restaurants sure make flaming saganaki look easy, but how will our intrepid deep-fried correspondents fare? But first, Amanda Vinicki and a look at what might be a prosperous fiscal future for local universities. Amanda.
Paris, after a 2-year budget impasse, had many students fleeing the state as money for financial aid went dry. Administrators at Illinois' public universities now have reason to smile. Under the new state spending plan, schools are set to see a nearly 5% increase in their operating budgets, making it more than $1 billion more. A further $3 billion has been earmarked for colleges and universities as part of a $45 billion multi-year infrastructure spending bill. That increased spending comes against a backdrop of sharply failing enrollment. So, will more money reverse the trend? Joining us to share their insights are Timothy Killeen, president of the University of Illinois, Elaine Maiman, president of Governors State University, and Z. Scott, president of Chicago State University. Thanks for joining us. Now, of course, students and families are like universities in that they don't have a lot of extra cash lying around. So, realizing that it can vary, of course, depending on the degree program a student's pursuing. I want each of you to go down. We'll start with you, Ms. Scott, to say, what is tuition and fees for a year, and how do you justify that being worthy of a student paying that sort of tuition?
So our tuition and fees for about a year is about $12,000. And we are probably, I think, the third lowest tuitioned in the state, and I think it's the benefit of the bargain. There's so many great programs at Chicago State, including our health sciences and nursing and pharmacy, and these are the kind of programs I think that lead to 21st century jobs. So I think it is indeed a bargain for a student who's looking to re-engage in education.
And Ms. Neiman.
Yes, we have the lowest tuition and fees in the Chicagoland area. It's under $12,000. And we also want to help students and families with financial literacy, to understand about the availability of money you don't have to pay back, like the Pell Grants. And now, thanks to the governor and the General Assembly, we have an increase in the state financial aid, the MAP grants, and we also have something called Aim High, which also
merit-based
helps.
scholarships.
Yes, and we define merit at Governor State University to include talent. So we're able to recruit students who are artists, students who are interested in theater, debaters, and that's been, something wonderful. And with our students who really are all challenged financially, whether, they fit in the general category or not, that's helped us to get their attention and to know that college can be affordable.
And how about U of I has, of course, 3 systems there, or 3 campuses?
Yes, we have multiple levels, but the good news here is we haven't changed our in-state tuition for 5 years. So the students who are coming now, and our enrollments have been growing by about 10,000 more students over the last 5 years or so.
The outlier.
So we're very much the outlier. We're very proud of that. Our student enrollments are growing, and we've kept tuition frozen for 5 years. And with the 4-year guarantee, that's a decadal commitment on tuition. So the numbers vary but we're very concerned about keeping our excellent, world-class product, affordable for families.
That
That's
tuition guarantee, meaning that Illinois requires that you pay the same tuition price throughout your university career for 4 years if you can graduate within that time. Are you going to be able to maintain that tuition fees?
We're going to strive to maintain the commitment to affordability, and of course the new budget really helps us enormously. This historic budget, which is 4.6%, doesn't sound like a huge number, but it's the biggest increase in almost 20 years. 18 to 20 years. So
nowhere
it's a very
near what
significant.
Universities got back in the day, I think 2008 or so, but certainly a big increase.
So we're on the march and we're committed to deliver for this state accordingly.
What about the Illinois commitment? This is something that you're committing to cover tuition for students, families with incomes under $61,000.
Yes.
Is that all campuses? Who does that apply to?
That applies to Urbana. That came from Urbana. We have similar or slightly different, more merit-based situations in Chicago. But the Illinois commitment that you mentioned, we're extremely proud of. That's led to an increase in applications. We think double-digit increase in applications, notably from underrepresented minority groups as well as everything else. Yes, any family whose total income is below the national median, which is $61,500, gets tuition paid for free for 4 years.
And why just at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign?
Well, we're looking at very different cohorts in different settings, and we're doing that at Urbana-Champaign, which is our biggest university. We think that's really important to bring in the middle class families who may have not been able to stretch, maybe with multiple siblings, etc., and to come to Urbana-Champaign if they're college ready at that level and succeed. So we're doing very important things as well in Chicago and in Springfield to keep our costs down, but they're slightly different in different settings.
Now, Z. Scott, we talked about declining enrollment at universities. That is something that particularly hit Chicago State. There was a time where the freshman class was in the double digits, I believe, in recent years. So what are you doing to reverse that?
First of all, we're making sure that our students have a certain amount of literacy with regard to affording college, and we've set aside, as President Mayman just talked about, some of the scholarship programs are also equally available on our campus, because 85% of our students qualify for MAP and Pell grants, which gives you a sense of the zip codes and the neighborhoods some of our students are coming from. So what we're doing is to try and make sure that we can close those gaps. So one of the programs that we're putting into place in the fall is a micro grant program. It's a nominal award that basically looks at the gap in a student's financing and automatically gives them that award without them even having to apply. For those students who have a hold on their account and the amount of that hold is modest, we're going to remove that hold with a commitment from that student to re-engage and earn a degree from Chicago State. So we're looking at the ways that we can help our students, because probably the number one thing that keeps a student from being retained or even considering a college education is financing. And we're trying to meet students at that need.
Now, what are some other of the lasting effects, Mr. Killeen, of the budget impasse that you're still fighting to recover from?
I think for us it was significantly reputational. There was a sense that Illinois had lost its way somehow, and that somehow the University of Illinois wasn't the world-class opportunity that it was formerly.
Can you get that back?
And absolutely, we've got it back in I would say in spades. We're stronger than before. We've come out, we're recruiting faculty, we're recruiting stellar faculty from around major institutions. We're growing our enrollments, we're keeping our costs down, and now with the capital investments that the state is coming forward, we can rebuild our facilities to be truly at the world-class level. So
and
I
same
think
at Governor State?
Yes, absolutely.
You're able to recover?
Oh, yes, and in fact, we did okay even through the budget impasse, even though it was very hard and very challenging. What's changed is that we have a narrative. We have a governor who believes that public higher education is the solution and not the problem. And we have families who hear this and who know that there is faith and confidence in public higher education, much deserved. And so that's helped us with recovering with applications and enrollment.
And yet, is it time for higher education in Illinois to evolve? I know, Mr. Killeen, you have a goal of increasing enrollment across the 3 campuses to, I believe, 93,000 students. That's an increase of, I don't know, roughly 10,000 or so. But given that you're seeing a declining enrollment at some of your peer institutions, is that to say that there's a need for consolidation?
Well, part of our need and our requirement is to keep students in the state. Some of the students who were accepted into our universities who don't come to go to other states. So part of our responsibility is to make sure that we preserve our talent in the state. We're very proud of our progress in that regard. 4 out of 5 of every student, every undergraduate student, comes from Illinois. So we're keeping our costs down. We're growing in that instance. Are we siphoning across? I do think there's a need for concerted corporate, large-scale thinking about public higher education and the value proposition it brings to the state. And we need to evolve continuously.
Particularly as online learning is becoming more popular. I know Governor State increased recently in some capacities to a 4-year university, but is it time to rethink?
But let me just make something clear, which I think gets missed. We have a new majority of students in the United States, and that new majority is made up of first-generation students of color, adults, and military veterans. This group has never been well served, but now that they're in the majority, they need to be better served. And Governor State University—
So that's where you see an opportunity.
Yes,
and how about you, Scott?
Here's what I see. What we see is when we lost students during the budget impasse, and these students are coming back to Chicago State, what we saw was a 10% drop in African American attendance in college. And that is something that not only worries us as presidents of universities, but also worries our governor and worries our philanthropic groups and worries our corporate partners. Because
the domino effect.
The domino effect. And what we're trying to do is re-engage with those students. And the idea that public—
So what, through recruiting? How?
We're trying to re-engage through recruiting, our programming, making sure that people understand the opportunity of education.
The buildings, perhaps through this capital funding
Exactly,
program.
but education is a game changer. It is what is needed to close the wealth gap that is widening in this state, not narrowing. And I think it got wider during the budget impasse. And I think that we are re-engaging with students to make them help make sure that they understand that education is an opportunity toward excellence.
Now, each of your campuses are hubs of the Discovery Partners Institute that is set to go in the South Loop on that 78 neighborhood. Mr. Kleen, what is the latest with that? Some people say that this is just a new Chicago campus version of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign campus.
It's much more than that. It's a coming together of a partnership that is truly going to be global and world-class and inventive, and it's going to be available for students to come and go, to move from job to job, small, medium, large companies. This is how you grow prosperity in a state like ours. You take advantage of our institutions, you take advantage of our intellectual heft, you bring in excellence, you bring in knowledge, you bring in collaborators who can work across.
An innovation hub that is getting a $500 million.
I am so excited about the potential here, and we've already raised almost that much money in non-state funding to match. This is going to be the envy of other states around the country.
Maybe then we will see enrollment go up. Now, up next, the producers behind a new documentary about the Eastland disaster. Stay with us.
On a July morning in 1915, thousands of factory workers and their families boarded a steamship on the Chicago River bound for a company picnic in Michigan. More than 800 of those passengers died before the steamship even left the dock. The Eastland disaster rattled the city of Chicago and the nation and has been called the blue-collar Titanic. But today the tragedy seems mostly forgotten. Now a new documentary hopes to change all that. It's called EASTLAND, Chicago's Deadliest Day, and it premieres tonight at 8 p.m. right here on WTTW. Joining us now are the film's executive producers, Harvey Moshman and Chuck Coppola. Welcome both of you back to Chicago tonight.
Thank you.
First, Chuck, a primer, what exactly happened on that day, July 24th, 1915?
Well, quickly, this is about a steamship that was filled with 2,500 factory workers and their families from Western Electric. They were all about to head across the lake to Michigan City, Indiana, to a company picnic, a huge event that would have had thousands of people. Think of Facebook or Google today chartering 5 steamships, taking their employees across the lake. It was a huge deal. And then, just as it was fully loaded, it started to teeter. It swung left, it listed right, it seesawed, and then rolled over.
And 800 people eventually lost their lives in this. Harvey Moshman, the film talks about the fact that this disaster happened in the middle of downtown Chicago. 850 people died, and yet it has largely been forgotten from the public consciousness. I mean, in the way that the Titanic hasn't been forgotten. Why is that?
Well, principally because there was nobody famous aboard the Eastland compared to the Titanic. Titanic it's an iceberg. This is a much more dramatic story. It falls to the bottom of the ocean in the middle of nowhere, and then the Eastland is a ship that just sort of turns over in a muddy river. I mean, it's completely different.
It never leaves dock. It just pulls
Right.
the post with it. Chuck Coppola, talk about the context. What was Chicago like in that time, and why is that important in telling this story?
Chicago was growing by leaps and bounds. It was gaining first-generation immigrants. It was gaining immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe in great numbers. And a lot of them came here looking for farmland, but then also found manufacturing jobs. Chicago was building factories. The stockyards were growing. U.S. Steel was growing as well. And so they were hoping to come here and make a new start. There was also a gritty underbelly to Chicago, and we learned about that by researching this. There were pickpockets and people who would take valuables off of the bodies from this disaster. They would go into the morgue and rob bodies there, and even be so brazen as to go inside people's homes in Hawthorne, part of Cicero, where there was a wake being held for a victim, and pluck little things from the person and the home.
The Where's Mine ethos was a big part of Chicago then, as it is now. Let's talk about some of the notable characters in this movie, or in this documentary. Helen Repa, a nurse. Tell us about her.
Helen was a nurse who worked for Western Electric and was essentially assigned to be on the boat that day when because 7,000 people were going to go over to the picnic and they wanted to have everything staffed. And Helen heard about the Eastland turning over on her way to the dock, jumped off the streetcar, hopped on the back of an ambulance, went downtown and began triage without any doctors or anybody telling her what to do. She moved people away and started rescuing people and resuscitating them, taking them to another hospital, ordering blankets for the survivors.
Right, for Marshall Fields.
Right, and insisting that Marshall Fields pay for it.
And then there was another interesting character nicknamed the Human Frog by the newspaper reports at the time. Who was he?
Well, the Human Frog was a 17-year-old adventurer. He was Reggie Bowles, hard G, Reggie, not Reggie. And he jumped on his motorcycle, rode down to the dockside, punched a cop, jumped into the water to evade the police that were now chasing him. And he started pulling up bodies as many as he could. Here are some scenes that we shot as part of our recreation of this amazing character, very colorful character, could hold his breath for 3.5 minutes, nearly as long as Houdini. And because of that, the newspaperman called him the Human Frog.
And you were saying he dove into the river, he dove into the
hull.
Into the hull of the boat to try and
40 times.
rescue. I'm also struck, I watched the film today, it's just fascinating. I'm struck by the amount of historical figures that are tied to this disaster. Tell us about the laundry list of people we know from history that were involved in this.
All right, I suppose the biggest name is Clarence Darrow, who was, in retrospect, when he wrote his autobiography, excluded the Eastland from any mention in that book because he apparently was embarrassed that he helped the owners get off. There is Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who probably is more widely known as the commissioner of baseball during the Black Sox scandal. And George Hallis had a small role in our story. He missed the boat that day, but he was coming down because he was part of the Western Electric softball team and that was going to play in Michigan City that day.
So we learned something that puts this into context about Kennesaw Mountain Landis. He's a federal judge in Chicago, very harsh person, and a fighter champion for the little person. And he came up with the charge for conspiracy against the defendants, against the ship owners.
This is the ship owners because
Right.
people wanted heads to roll after
Absolutely.
this. The ship should never have taken that amount of passengers.
Interestingly enough, he came up with conspiracy in the Black Sox scandal as well. So conspiracy was on his mind. But you're right.
Conspiracy wasn't the right charge.
Right.
Manslaughter would have
It
been
was,
the right charge.
it was an overreach.
And again, and you get into this into the film, but just can you boil down what the causes of this tragedy were?
Well, it was a perfect storm of problems that all came to head on one day. All right. First of all, the boat was never designed by someone who had designed a passenger ship before. He had only designed cargo boats. Cargo stays down in the holds, doesn't move around. Passengers walk in a ship and go up and move the top. So you need a ballast system that is nimble enough to counteract the movement of passengers. The Eastland did not have that. The Eastland's ballast system was completely empty, actually, at the time that people were boarding. The captain and the engineer had never had more than a few hundred people on the boat that entire summer. So even if they were well acquainted with the boat, they had never had this experience before. That and the tons and tons of weight that had been added to the ship at the very top. One, because of the Titanic maintaining that there had to be a lifeboat position for everyone on a passenger ship, and otherwise that they had removed a wooden deck and replaced it with concrete.
And of course, there's graft, there's greed, there's a lot of factors at play here. Chuck Coppola, you mentioned Western Electric. It was their employees. They made their employees go on this ship to go to this company picnic, and then at the end they said, well, this wasn't our responsibility. They chose to go on that ship.
Our story is about how the rich and well-moneyed interests and well-connected interests got away with it. Western Electric, a lot of people love Western Electric and has a very faithful fan base following of former employees here. But in that time, in 1915, they exerted pressure on their employees to attend this picnic. The reason for that, you'll have to watch the
All right, I know I won't give it away, and that documentary is going to be on in about 15 minutes. So Harvey Moshman, Chuck Coppola, thank you so much. It's a fascinating film.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And it's a remake. You did a film about this in 2001.
Well, that was the prequel.
That was the prequel to this. All right. And again, it's called EASTLAND, Chicago's Deadliest Day, and you can catch it tonight right after our show here on WTTW. And we're back with more right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
They are acrobats, they are contortionists, and they are happily married. A Chicago couple is part of an international team bringing a flashy new take on dinner and a show. Teatro ZinZanni opened this week in the Loop. Chicago Tonight went behind the curtain to meet the stars of a Vegas-style vaudeville show that promises love among the chaos. Here's Jay Shefsky with that story.
In a small theater 14 stories above Randolph Street, the husband and wife team Duo Rose rehearse a stage act that combines athleticism and artistry.
So I work as a welder when we're not on stage. So I make circus equipment for different artists, and Sylvia makes all of her costume. It's a trapeze act that we conceived about 12 years ago. So we started working together, and the act has grown over time, and it's kind of a mix between contortion and dynamic elements.
We like to keep it growing and changing, so we like to always be working on something new.
They grew up in the Chicago area, and wait till you hear how they met.
I grew up in Evanston. As a kid, I did classes over at the Actors Gymnasium. I was there for about 8 years, and then I went to take contortion lessons and therefore met Sam.
Yes. I was living at her contortion coach's house. The coach called and said, I can't make my next class. Can you stretch the next person that walks through the door? And that was Sylvia. So, yeah. And that's how we met, and we started training together from there and started dating soon after. And yeah.
Duo Rose is just one of the many acts in this unusual show. A sort of European circus arts cabaret with spectacle, live music, comedy, and dinner. One of the ringmasters is an agent of chaos called Caesar.
He is a wild, over-the-top Latin lover. He loves the ladies, the gentlemen, dogs, cats. He's really not discerning. But his job is to, in a way, facilitate the party. He's unfiltered. He's a joyous character. He's outrageous. And I was basically a shy kid growing up. So he's a great outlet for me, a great catharsis for me.
For 30-plus years, Frank Ferrante has portrayed Groucho Marx on stage and on PBS.
Groucho Marx is verbally and physically probably the greatest comedian the country's produced. And there's a fearless quality to Groucho Marx. And I try to bring a fearlessness into the tent, into the center ring.
The lavish tent was built in the 14th floor space of what was once an auditorium for a Masonic hall. It makes for an intimate hideaway.
This great American tradition of burlesque and vaudeville is happening, right under the tent. The acts will literally happen over your head.
Duo Rose has performed in circuses and festivals all over the world, but never in their hometown.
We really haven't had a chance to perform in Chicago. We developed our act and then immediately started doing the festivals.
It's really exciting for us to be here where our friends and family can actually come and see us sometimes. And also to be here with this cast. I'm proud to be on stage with every member of this cast.
And these world-renowned circus artists make the case for experiencing entertainment not on screens, but live.
We can make eye contact even from the trapeze to the back row.
So one of my favorite things is being on the trapeze and styling down to someone and just seeing their face and how we're affecting them, the emotion that, we're kind of imparting to them.
People don't remember necessarily what you did, but they remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And that is really only accessible in live shows.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Jay Shefsky.
Teatro ZinZanni was a hit in Seattle and San Francisco, where guest artists included Joan Baez and Ann Wilson from the band Heart. Their dedicated Chicago show called Love, Chaos, and Dinner opened this week. Find out more on our website. Our Deep Fridays crew loves a challenge. Each week, WTTW's summer web series, Nick Blumberg and Erica Gunderson put their unique spin on Chicago's Food Hall of Fame, or should I say, Hall of Flame.
This week, we are setting stuff on fire.
Woo! Finally!
We are doing flaming saganaki. Now, saganaki is a breaded and fried Greek cheese.
So at the Parthenon, a woman suggested it. She's like, yeah, why don't you set it on fire? And he was like, hold my ouzo, here we go. In a restaurant, they fry it in the shallow pan with a little bit of oil. We don't do a little bit of oil.
Let's set this on fire away from the oil.
Okay.
I didn't need that thumb hair.
What is the technique here? It looks so easy online.
Be Greek.
Who do we know that's Greek here?
Phil Ponsopoulos.
No Opa there. Well, let's see what happens in the full episode. It's burning up right now on our website. And that's our show for this Thursday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7 for the Week in Review. And for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.